Hello, everybody. This is my response to week 3. There were a lot of good questions and insights, both in the discussions, the reading reviews, and the blogs. I want to encourage you again to read the blogs because there's a lot going on there, and there's just really good stuff. And it's only like a paragraph per person, or less than a paragraph, so you can get a feel for other people in the course and what they're going through. I know myself, this has been a pretty tough semester already. I lost my grandfather about 3 or 4 weeks ago. He was formative in my life, and I actually took care of the arrangements in the funeral, so that weighed me down quite a bit. And there have been some other things. Most importantly, my wife is pregnant with twins, our first, and we're doing sonograms and all that good stuff. So it's very, very exciting. A lot of things happening. So, and I know that many of you are, moving or having surgery soon or all that stuff. It's amazing what happens in the 11 weeks of the course. So, I'm going to respond to 6 insights. I'm going to try to keep it brief, but all of them are very, very important, and they didn't receive just a whole lot of attention from Metzger and from myself because I patterned my lectures after Metzger. So, first thing I wanted to talk about is this isn't my tradition. One person said that the course is challenging them because they learned different things from pastors in the past. Now, a pastor's primary goal is to inspire people to trust in God. Now, our primary goal, or my primary goal, is to teach you like historical facts and historical contexts and introduce you to the New Testament. So our purposes are completely different. Although I hope to encourage you in your faith, whatever your faith is, that's not my primary purpose. So what I cover, what I emphasize, is going to be a little bit different than what pastors do. And I don't want you to think that pastors in the past have been dishonest with you, or other people have given you wrong information. Well, it might be wrong, but it doesn't mean that it wasn't valuable, and it doesn't mean that your faith experience in the past doesn't have a very, very rich history. It's very, very easy to be incorrect about history. It's difficult. I know that for myself, I have a PhD, and I studied the Bible. Well, I studied history for about 20 hours a day for 7 years. So I have covered a lot more ground than most pastors did in their MDiv programs. So I know a lot more stuff, but I've also been exposed to my own incorrect views of history. Everything was wrong, and so I've corrected myself over and over and over and over again. So a lot of people don't have time to do that. So, in short, tradition and faith are inherently separated from historical facts. We have faith in spite of historical facts, and whenever history does support faith, that's all well and good, but it's really not faith unless you're believing beyond the historical point and you're taking a deeper truth. The example that I'll use is art. Art has value even though it doesn't have historical significance until much, much later, after the artist dies or something. You can go to the museum and you're not experiencing historical facts other than the art is old, but the art speaks to you without words, and you participate in the art. And it doesn't matter when the art was made. It doesn't matter if the art reflects historical truth. It could be paintings of fairies or whatever, and you can, or any other imaginary scene. One of my favorite paintings is a painting of Achilles in the Iliad, defending his betrothed. He wanted to marry a woman and she was denied by the king. So that never happened, yet whenever you look at it, you participate in the art, and it encourages you and it builds you up. Now, if somebody says, well, their paint strokes went a certain way, and they're wrong about that, it still doesn't hinder my ability to enjoy the painting. The same goes for music. And I use this with atheists a lot, because I have a lot of friends who are atheists that ask me, how can you believe in spite of all these historical things that you know or that they know? And I have to tell them, it's just like art or music. You listen to music and you enjoy music, but all those little details don't really matter, because the music is made for you to enjoy and experience something specific. And in the case of the Bible, we are meant to experience God. You don't experience God by merely reading words on a page that have gone through many, many hands and have changed significantly over the years. That stuff really doesn't matter in the end, because we are trying to experience the God behind the text, beyond the text. So I hope that answers your question. I don't want to frustrate anyone with this course as far as your faith goes. I can tell you that in my own journey, learning history has only helped my faith. Not because it affirmed everything that I believed, but because I've been able to enjoy God, the experience of God, without worrying about all that other stuff. So, but it does enhance. Everything that I've learned enhances my faith. But it's separate. The two issues are separate for me. So anyway, that's my take on that. 7 minutes. Why wasn't Jesus just literal? This goes back to the idea of art. Art is not literal. Some art is meant for you to just look at it and understand what it is. That would be a stick figure. Something simple, a circle, square. It's dead. But with Jesus, he utilizes 5 or 6 different types of speech. The picturesque speech and the parables and all that other good stuff. Because he is helping us, or he is pointing us to the Father, who is complex. And, God is not simple. And it's also like a novel. Novels are not simple because they are used to tell us a truth that we cannot experience in nonfiction. And so when you read a novel, it's fiction, but you can participate in the experience that the author wants to give you. And that's what makes novels so wonderful. So that's why Jesus teaches not just in simplistic terms, and so we can experience God from all different kinds of angles. You can interpret parables, and you can interpret other things that Jesus says many different ways. And whenever you learn Greek, it's going to be even more complex, because when you're translating from a foreign language, you have many different choices that you can make regarding grammar and syntax and all that other good stuff. So there's another thing, and this is going to come up again in another question, but why, this part of Jesus, why not being literal? Well, if he came out and just said his message plainly, he would have been arrested and crucified before his time. He said over and over in a gospel you're yet to read, and John, he says over and over again, the time has not yet come. He knew that he was going to be persecuted, and we know that that's a historical fact, that Jesus, whenever he upset the religious leaders, he's going to pay for it. So anyway, that is why Jesus did not speak in simplistic, literal terms. How can we know that the 77 miracles occurred? Well, Metzger spent a lot of time with this because he thinks that a lot of these miracles really happened. And I thought he came on very, very strong with respect to that belief. I have believed for a long time that none of the miracles were actually true. And I've gotten into some heated arguments with some of my friends from Wayland who were in the religion department with me. It's just something that's it's really hard to prove, you know. There's a guy named W.C. Bauer who wrote Orthodoxy and Heresy. He was a great scholar a couple years ago. You know, I think it was in the 1930s or something like that. He said, you cannot have an effect in history without a historical cause. And that became my theme in my historical studies for a long time. You know, and what that means is you have to have an action that's verifiably scientific, fact in order for it to have an effect in history. So it has to be in this realm of possibilities that excludes by default any kind of miracle or any kind of interaction between God and humans. So all of the miracles are out. And so what do you do with the miracles if they're not true? Well, a good example of that is the parable of the prodigal son. It never happened, yet it's the most powerful parable in the Bible. You know, the father accepting his son after he spent all of his money. So what we do with that is we learn that God is forgiving and God is just. God never stops loving us. You know, he is like a good father. In fact, we call him the Heavenly Father. That's what we learned from the prodigal son. We don't need any kind of historical interaction between God and humans to learn about that. You know, and by interaction, I mean, you know, God healing somebody, or God, well, actually healing is pretty significant. A lot of different healing stories, or raising somebody from the dead, healing the sick. These kind of things, we really aren't going to know if they really happened. And that's kind of sad in a sense, but it's kind of hopeful in a sense. You know, that the first prerogative of a miracle is to teach you something about God. And so the miracle doesn't need to have happened for you to glean from this an experience that's positive. You know, thanking God that Jesus healed that blind man in the story. And knowing that he's there for us, even though we can't see him. You know, there's a lot of things that we take from the stories other than we have to assert that Jesus did it. The second thing that we can do is after we have faith, you know, the faith in God, you know, and we experience the richness of the miracle, the historical value of it is secondary. You know, we've already gotten what we need to get out of the miracle story if we're inspired, and then we can go on to say, well, if it really happened, it's that much more important. But it's just very, very difficult to find out. Some miracles we know probably didn't happen because they address specific issues within the church. You know, the churches were going through a lot of stuff, and we know some of that stuff through Paul and through other sources. So we know that some of these miracles probably didn't happen. And one of those miracles is a good example of that is the resurrection of Lazarus. You know, that's something that addresses a very real issue in the church, and that is denial of Jesus in light of persecution. You know, Christians were being persecuted. We've talked about this before. What you had to do is, if you're brought before the court you'd be tortured first to find out the names of the other Christians. If you give them up, you might live, and then they tried to go back into the Christian community, the people that betrayed their fellow Christians. And so we have Peter denying Christ 3 times, and Christ reinstating him 3 times. But with Lazarus, you have this 3 times Jesus says that he loves Lazarus, and he resurrects him from the dead. That is very much like the restoration of Peter, and it tells us something about the community, that John's community accepted these people back in that betrayed their fellow Christians. And, you think now, I think, who can blame them? But they caused the death of brothers and sisters within the church. So that was something that was very, very significant. So there are purposes for miracles. When you can see clearly that the purpose of the miracle is something within the church, it almost certainly didn't happen. And then you have the idea of, are miracles even possible? So they're fun to believe in, but it's not necessary. Did Jesus consider himself the actual Son of God? Probably not, but it is a very important theme in the gospel. And in John especially, you have this idea that when Jesus reveals himself as the Son of God, it's going to be over. He's going to irritate the Pharisees too much, and he's going to be killed. And he said, not until God's ready, not until God is ready, and then he revealed himself. Now, the problem is, the Son of God idea, it comes later in Christianity. It doesn't really appear instantly. It's something that Christians, Jesus had an apotheosis. He had this, he was eventually made divine by the church. So it's something that is probably not historically probable, and I can tell you that most scholars that I read think that Jesus didn't think he was the Son of God. But there's a lot of conservative scholars that believe differently, so you can kind of take your pick, but I'm convinced otherwise. So I think Jesus didn't believe himself to be the Son of God, yet I can, when Jesus calls himself Son of Man, or there's Son of God in the Bible, I know it came later in Christianity, not too much later, but it did take about 400 years for Christians to work out how Jesus was the Son of God and what that meant. So it's not something that you can just take for granted, it being in the text. Does it matter when the Gospels are written? Metzger spent a lot of time on when the Gospels were written. And the reason why is it impacts interpretation. We have these 4 Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and they happened during a time of great historical significance. It's the 1st century, and the Romans are in charge. That tells us that Latin is around. That tells us that Roman law is being in place. And that tells us that there's a struggle between the temple and the Roman powers that be. And if Jesus was born just 50 years later, it would have been a completely different story, a completely different setting. So we need to place the Gospels, at least within their historical setting, as close as we possibly can, because different people are in power at different times. There are different kinds of persecutions of the Jews going on. Jerusalem is a very big deal, and obviously in Judaism and for Jesus. So when the temple is destroyed in 70 A.D., or there's a rebellion in 136 A.D. by the Jews against the Romans, it would have a significant impact on how we interpret the Gospels, because it was a completely different religious and political tone in the area that Jesus lived and preached. So that's why it matters when the Gospels are written. I hope that this has been useful to you. I'm sorry I'm not more photogenic, but anyway, life is tough, and it shows. But I really enjoy reading your work, and I hope that you continue on that path. The midterm is coming up quickly. It's going to be on week 5, and we have the same amount of work, and I'm sorry about that, but we have the same amount of work as we usually do for a week. And I'll give you a week on the midterm. So you're going to have all week to do it, just as much time as usual. So you need to budget more time to spend on this course in week 5. After that, it's a downhill, less reading, I think, easier work. But we have to start out running because there's so much to learn in the immediate sense, to get you on your feet, to introduce you to the New Testament. So, anyway, thank you very much, and have a good week.